While Dr. Eric Pearl was operating a thriving practice in chiropractic health, in fact one of the most successful in Los Angeles, he felt that he had seen it all. That is until the universe had other plans for him. While going through a series of anomalous and uninvited events over the course of some months, he realized he was gaining an ability to heal in ways he'd never before experienced or even knew existed. Well, many years later, Dr. Pearl has gone on to introduce hundreds of thousands of individuals to what is now called reconnective healing, and he continues to show the world how to live a reconnected life. Just before we got started with this interview, Dr. Pearl shared with me an experience in which he was conducting a workshop on the reconnective healing approach. He brought up a young man from the audience to teach him how to do the healing. But when Dr. Pearl then summoned a volunteer from the audience in which to perform the healing on, unbeknownst to him, the volunteer was the young man's father, who had been suffering for years from a degenerative joint disease. Well, shortly after the method was shown to the young man, he then followed step by step what Dr. Pearl had shown him on his father, and within minutes, the father had a full range of motion after all these years. Needless to say, this was an emotional experience for both father, son, and even Dr. Pearl himself. After he shared this touching story with me, here's what I asked him. Do you ever cease to be amazed? Dr. Eric Pearl?
Let me see. That's an interesting question. Every healing is new, dramatic, and wonderful. Mm-hmm. And every healing is like a healing for the very first time. For the very first time. And I think with that consciousness, that's what allows the healings to come through at their fullest. And by not having intention of a specific result, doesn't mean there's no intention. The intention can be that there be something wonderful that happens, even whether or not we recognize it. But without having any specific intention of a specific result, then in that wisdom of the uncertainty, you find that you allow the universe to orchestrate the healing in ways far beyond what you may have anticipated. It's a dance in many ways. And when you dance, it's not always best that you always lead.
Absolutely. I want to say something that you just absolutely amazed me. We're going to go off script because we both, I think, deplore scripts anyway.
I didn't know we had a script.
We don't have a script. I'm looking at a little bit of a script, but we're just going to chat. Something I love about you. May I call you Eric?
I hope so.
Okay.
Because if you call me Fred, I might not answer.
Right. You are so thoughtful. F-U-L-L. I've watched your presentation. I've watched you. You and I have had several conversations. Very much like me, actually. You think, you process. I know why you're so good at what you do, I think. Because you're channeling. I hasten to use the words, I'm not a label person, but what I sense is that you're really gleaning information as you are asked questions. You don't just spit something out. You process. This is, I think, part of your gift is what I see. I'm not asking you to agree or disagree. I'm just telling you what I see. And I think that's part of what makes you so special. I love your story. And I know you've told this story in your book. And I want you to tell it, if you would, for our audience a little bit. Again, the impetus for what got you into what is now called reconnective healing. It was an anomaly. It sounds like there were a string of anomalies for you that were really blessings. Wouldn't you agree?
There were a multitude of very many interesting things that manifested. And you know, you want to say, well, it started here. But you never know when something began, because if you step back 3 feet, you see it actually began a little earlier, began a little earlier, began a little earlier. So, I mean, for me, when I've gone way back, if I wanted to, I could point to my birth, because my mother died giving birth to me, and came back to life and told of the experience, and it was not spoken about at that time. We didn't have such respected researchers in the field as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, Raymond Moody. We didn't have Daniel Brinkley. We didn't have Eben Alexander. And so my mother related the story to me one time when I had asked, because, let me see, I think my grandmother had recently died, so I must have been around 5, and my concept of dying was you end up in a box underground. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know how to not be conscious in that picture that I was lying there in a box underground. So to me, my idea of death was I lie down in a box and I'm underground forever, and that didn't feel really good. So I went home and I told her, and she sat me down and explained the story where she was lying on the delivery table. She felt as if and heard motors or engines starting at her feet and going to her ankles and her knees and moving up, and she tried to get the attention of the doctors and the other people in the delivery room, because she knew that if it got to her heart she was going to die, and she didn't want to die, and she couldn't get anyone's attention. She was amazed they didn't hear it. And suddenly it got to her heart, and the next thing she knew, she had left her body. And she was moving up through layers of beings or souls. However, she said, we don't really have words for this here. The first level or layer were the people who didn't realize that they had died, or they felt they had work yet to finish here. The second, she doesn't recall. Third one was the only one that felt a little uncomfortable for her to pass through, and uncomfortable for the people who were on it. It was like a delay, not a stoppage, but let's say a temporary delay for people who had done the only thing that you could do to temporarily interrupt, shall we say, to interrupt God's plan, which was they were the ones who had taken their own lives. Mm-hmm. She passed through a few more layers and got to the top, found herself drifting down a lane. Although her feet weren't moving, she feels that this is what most people refer to as the tunnel. Mm-hmm. She passed flowers of colors she had never seen, saw people from this lifetime and from many lifetimes, knew who they were. One glance conveyed volumes of information, yet there was no language, nothing verbal. Mm-hmm. She was finding herself imbued with the secrets of the universe, how ridiculous it is to judge people by their appearance, how we can't blame God for anything, even seemingly inexplicable atrocities such as drive-by shootings, mm-hmm. how there's a reason for everything and everything makes perfect sense. She knew why the earth was round, why the grass was green, why the sky was blue, how war is a temporary state of barbarism that we are evolving beyond, and we will evolve beyond. When she saw this light, she was moving towards the light. She was afraid to look at it because it was so bright she thought it might burn her eyes, but she did open her eyes and look and realized that there was nothing physical to burn. And when she got there, her life was laid out before her, and she knew it was a beautiful life, and yet there was no judgment. She knew and realized that if there were any one thing that people who pass on, people who die, who leave their body, regret, it's only that those here who are left behind mourn them, because we don't realize what a beautiful place that is home. This is a temporary visit. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly she found herself being sent back. And now for all the struggling she did not to go, not to want to die in the first place, now she didn't want to return. But she was told she had to come back to raise her child. And she felt herself being programmed to forget all the insights that she had. And so she struggled to hold on to these few that she retained when she came back. And one of the things she learned is that how she would never judge anyone by their appearance again. When she woke up in the hospital bed, she looked at the woman who was in the bed next to her and thought to herself, oh, is that an unattractive woman? And then she laughed. She said, didn't I just learn So, did it start there? I don't know. I went back for a little visit with someone. Went back and saw things we didn't see. But if you want to go on a more earthly surface level, where did it begin? Well, I practiced as a chiropractor for 12 years, and one night when I was asleep, for about an hour after I'd gone to sleep, I woke up because a bright light came bursting through my eyes. I opened my eyes to see what it was, and it wasn't anything unusual, except for the lamp next to my bed. It had decided to turn itself on. I'd had that lamp for a good 10 years. It hadn't turned itself on before, but there it was, and my bedroom door, which was closed before I went to sleep, was open. So it felt as if someone was in my house, one or more people, that I'd been being watched. And I got up with a knife that was somewhere in the room, an old can of pepper spray from a self-defense course I'd taken years before, so it was probably empty, but I thought it made me look intimidating. And my Doberman Pinscher was probably more frightened than I was, and we went hunting through the house. Couldn't find anyone. I decided it was my imagination. I went back to sleep. But that Monday when I went into the office, as I began working with my patients, 7 of my patients independently told me that they felt as if people were in the rooms watching us, the way I felt at my home. Other patients felt multiple sets or pairs of hands working on them, touching them at the same time that I was working with them. Their eyes started darting back and forth. As I moved my fingers or my hands, I could get muscles to move involuntarily in their fingers or their arms or their legs, or a ripple in their face. When they opened their eyes, they told me they were seeing colors they'd never seen, smelling flowers they'd never smelled, and they started demonstrating healings, real healings.